Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and a review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about the GM Trouble Tree. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
A couple quick announcements before we get things rolling today. So we have scheduled our next Indie RPG Day for July 14th from 2 to 4. And I am going to be running some flavor of Itris B, the surreal RPG from somewhere in Scandinavia. They're Sweden or Finland or Norway. That's all of those countries, I think. But should be a good time, and hope to see you guys there. And it's going to be awesome because surreal noir is terrible and bad and awesome. Right on. So, in addition to that, second announcement is that we are trying to put together some things to do for Gen Con for any of you that make the pilgrimage to Indianapolis for Gen Con. And we're going to try and put together some times for us to just sort of head up to one of the open gaming rooms and sit down and hang out and do some gaming and whatnot. Last year, we ran what ended up being the final playtest for Worms and had a great time. And so I think we'll bring some games there, and we're trying to pick a day, and we'll get that posted up on the Twitter and on the Facebook, and we'll mention it here as well. And if any of you are at Gen Con, we'd love to sit down and play some games with you and put some names to faces. Last thing is that Hastings Party, our second quarterly zine, is moving right along in the production process. I got the two of the final art pieces for the zine, and there are two more that are on their way to get done. So I'm going to be sharing those two that are finished, probably on our Patreon and on social media and stuff like that, so you guys can check those out. And that one should be releasing in July, so I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more playtests of that just to make sure that we have it all ironed out, and it should be coming out in July. Done a pretty good job, pretty proud of maintaining our production schedule so far, so we'll see how that continues to go, but it's been a good time. And if you guys are interested, what?
Because the next one hinges on me.
Oh, no. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying, like, it's been a...
James.
No, but it's one of those things where it's like, you watch all these people make all these games, and granted, the zines are pretty small, so it's not nearly as big of a project, right? But at the same time, it's a much smaller team of me. And so, been kind of interesting to see, because I'm like, man, like I haven't had any major hiccups or anything, but been able to get it all put together and do it, and it's been cool. So if any of you are interested in any of our quarterly zines, they are available through our Patreon, and you guys can check them out there. Here very soon, though, we're going to have an itch.io store. I know, not very soon, actually right now. So Worms is the digital portion of it is live on itch.io, so you can go to, I believe it's justonemorefix.itch.io, and Worms is available there if you guys are interested in it. And the last piece of this is that we are working on getting our NPC library put together for our Patreon. I'm not sure where or how that's going to look or how it's going to live. So we've got a lot of things to put up there for it, but it's sort of coming together now because I'm not sure how or where it's going to live, because we want to make sure it's sort of like user-friendly and easy to work and find what's sort of there. So we're sort of putting that together as we speak, and that should be coming up in the next couple weeks. We should have that all finalized and together for everyone. So today we are going to talk about the GM Trouble Tree, which is an idea that we sort of just hatched in the last couple weeks or month or so. And it's something that I've kind of used, but I wouldn't say formally really had it like as a solid plan. It was more like a flow chart, I guess, right? So for those of you that don't know out there, a trouble tree is something that, my experience with them was largely dealing with cars when I was still working in car dealerships. So there's a problem with a car, and it gives you an engine code, and we'll say it's P0200 or whatever, right? And that has something that goes along with it, and it says, is this code present? So you go to yes or no, and under the yes side, you follow it down, and it asks you to do a couple tests, and then those will be like, is the voltage above 2, between 2 and 1, or less than 1? And then you'll go to whichever that one is, and then it sort of walks you through sort of like a decision-making process to see what the actual problem is, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to try and do now is we're going to try and put together some kind of a plot or story or mystery sort of using the trouble tree as a mechanism to get there, right? So there'll be a large problem at the top and some kind of a solution at the bottom, and then various decision-making points that will break off and go different directions, hopefully ending up somewhere near the bottom, right?
We use this in ACLS too.
Yeah, so...
Is the patient breathing? Yes or no?
Yeah.
If no...
Yes. Identify the rhythm. Is it VTAC? Shock, yes or no? Right on. Yeah, very true. So there's lots of industries that use trouble trees. So if you do any kind of technical computer stuff, there's lots of trouble trees for that. There's lots of trouble trees for mechanics, electronics, the medical field, all kinds of stuff. So a quick Google search will give you a great example of what they look like, and they're pretty self-explanatory. They really work pretty well, especially if they're structured well. So
I just want to see like a snarky trouble tree, like for something ridiculous.
Oh, there are a lot of them.
You should make one for like, in the ER they have them for everything, right? Because it's like emergency medicine. But you should make one for like cleaning the rooms. Is the room dirty? Yes or no?
We're going to build some kind of a GM trouble tree for Trail of Cthulhu. Is that right? Is that the one we picked?
That is what we picked.
Okay, so let's see how terrible we can do this. So hopefully it'll work out, and we'll end up with something that's usable and awesome, and not a complete disaster. So...
I already have regrets. Let's do it.
Are we sticking with Trail?
I don't know.
I'm good either way.
I liked it because it was different. It's not something we'd really done anything with before.
Well, here's my only thought. If we do it with Trail, is it's more of a mystery, right? So it's sort of like solving some kind of...
You mean what we're doing or the game?
Well, both. Yeah, right. But like...
It's a mystery.
So we're going to have like a larger question at the top about like some kind of a mystery, and then the solution to it at the bottom or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's about how we get there. And that one's a little more straightforward, I guess. Whereas the vampire one, it's like that could be anything.
So are we looking to start with like an overarching concept or a bad guy, or where do you start with this?
Okay, so
thing.
Sticking with the Trail of Cthulhu, right? So here's what I think we should probably do initially. Maybe we should pick. So first, it's going to be going to be a mystery, right?
Oh, sorry, that's not what we were picking.
A Trail of Cthulhu mystery, right?
Mysterious shogoth.
And then we have to pick. I guess my question is: do we want to work this from the beginning to end, or do we want to come up with the end and then work towards it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Is there one way that works better than the other?
Well, I feel like specifically I don't know if it relates to this trouble tree thing at all, but for mysteries, I feel like coming up with the ending of the mystery first is probably best, and then working towards it, because you have to lay seeds and clues towards the mystery. Seems like
the most logical thing,
right? Yeah. So we need to pick what our disaster is going to be at the end of the Trail of Cthulhu game. And generally speaking, I have two endings. Maybe there might be
death or madness.
True. But like, what happens if they stop it, and then what happens if they don't, right? Though if they stop it, generally that is... Do
we have to define it, though? Does that even, like... Can we just say inevitable badness is the end conclusion?
Well, yeah, but I think we need to sort of define what kind of a badness. Is it a badness that, like, breaks the world in half and destroys it? Is it a badness that awakens, like, an elder god? And you just sort of leave it open-ended there? Is it a badness that summons deep ones from the ocean that come into Innsmouth and, destroy Innsmouth or whatever, We need to pick a bad guy. So do we want to pick, like, an elder god, or do we want to just leave it, like, as a vague cult? Or...
Well, I think it obviously needs to be an elder god, since...
All right, so...
That's what we're doing here.
Right. Well, it could just be cultists in general. They may not know that...
No, they're boring.
Okay, fair
cultists.
Enough. So...
they need to have a purpose. Hence the cult.
What elder god are we choosing?
I already know you want to pick Hastur.
So my choice would be Hastur or Shub-Niggurath. Go with 1,000 Young. Either one would be fine for me. I guess it depends on what kind of a mystery we want to run. So if we're going to... Assuming we're going to break it down to those two, right? Hastur is more of like a mind-breaking, insanity kind of a thing, right? And then Shub-Niggurath is more of like a world-devouring creatures and nastiness, right? So I guess it depends on which version of
I always prefer world-devouring.
Right on. Shub-Niggurath it is.
There's no need to, beat around the bush and be all, like, surreal with me. Eating the world is fine.
I agree. And the fun part with Shub-Niggurath is you get a shogoth every time. You're right. Hard to go wrong with shogoth. When in doubt, shogoth.
Ah, yes.
All right. So at the end of this, the bad side of our trouble tree at the very end is Shub-Niggurath wakes up and begins spilling thousands of young to eat the world.
That seems pretty bad.
Very good.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there.
So we have Shub-Niggurath wakes at the bottom. Alrighty, so at the top, what is the inciting incident that sets our players into motion?
Do I have to answer all the questions?
No,
It's too hard.
I'm just rolling things around in my head, and I feel like this is
I like a sinkhole. There should be some kind of
a
sinkhole.
sinkhole. Okay, so we can. Well, that's something fun that you can just do out to the side too. Is we can just make notes of things that we
No,
want
I want
to
that
include.
to be the inciting incident.
Oh, a sinkhole.
A sinkhole.
Okay.
If it's wildly inconvenient enough, you will be forced to investigate the origins of said sinkhole.
Okay. Right on. So,
Feels like a very real world sort of event.
right, kind of mundane as well. You can involve your geology skill, like you mentioned before.
You see, it all comes back to geology.
Right? The slow study
If only
of geology.
If only you picked the geologist.
Okay, so we're going to say that why don't we go with the inciting incident is a sinkhole appears in town.
This happened recently.
It did. Terre Haute
Some of the
City
reason why
fire
it's
truck
great.
drove over a section of downtown and oopsie daisy, it sank. Although the truck was okay.
It was going fast enough that it
True story.
was like in the movies. Speed. Just like that. Keanu was driving the fire truck.
That was a bus.
In this story, it's a fire
Oh,
truck.
okay. There's not many
I'm not seeing
passengers
the
to blow up. All right, so the sinkhole appears in town. So clearly they're going to either go investigate it or be asked to investigate it, right? Mm-hmm. So why don't we make that our first decision tree here? On one side we'll have they hear about it and they go on their own. Okay? Does that work? Mm-hmm. Go.
So I feel like if that is the decision, then there needs to be an extra mysterious thing about the sinkhole that prompts them to go and investigate it. Mm-hmm. Like some kind of rumor that you feed to them based on their chosen occupation, profession, whatever.
So I think in the classic Trail of Cthulhu sense, we're going to have several academics and professors or private investigator style people, right? So I think we can sort of base this around that style of game, being that's kind of the conceit for Trail or Call of Cthulhu, right?
It'd be kind of fun if it was like a private investigator, and so like this construction company has decided to build something and this sinkhole opens up and they like suspect a competitive company had something to do with it. So they send the private investigator to go look into it.
Right.
Like,
And then lo and
sinkhole
behold,
sabotage.
they sabotaged us by sinkhole, and then I found a shogoth. Worst case ever.
Just saying.
Okay, so on one side we have they go and investigate this on their own, right? So maybe this is our academics or people that work for the city or something, right? If you have them in a group.
Contractors.
Right. So if they go and investigate on their own, what is it they're going to gain if they go investigate this on their own? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, my vision is that they would have the opportunity to maybe contact some municipal people that might have more information initially on how and why. Do you know what I'm saying? That they wouldn't get if someone called them in to investigate it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Like they would get information from the municipal people that they would not have gotten on their own.
Yeah. And they could still like backtrack and go find those people, but it would be like if they're going to go, they show up and like maybe towards the beginning of the investigation of this thing, and then there would be more information that they would get sort of like because of being there at the initial stage of the investigation, as opposed to the initial part happens and then someone goes to seek them out for it. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Does it make sense?
I kind of pictured like this opening up and there's like, you know, underground tunnels as you do.
Right,
and,
yeah.
you know, shogoths, whatever.
Right.
Anyways, giant shogoth tunnels under the city. Mm-hmm. But perhaps if they went through some kind of municipal worker to begin with, they would find out that these tunnels were like in disuse, disrepair, had been vacant for some time.
Right on.
Whereas if they went on their own, they would just be like, oh, these tunnels, now we have to figure out about these tunnels. Whereas somebody who's been doing this all their life could just be like, oh, yeah, those are the downtown X tunnels shut down back in 1973.
Right. So I'm going to draw two arrows here. So I'm going to say we're obviously both of these lead to investigating the actual scene, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to draw an arrow like this, because those are both clearly going to go to the scene, right? But then off of this one where we're going on our own, we end up with clues from municipal workers, right?
What's the other choice? What is this? I can't read that.
It says prompted to investigate.
Oh, okay.
So from clues from the municipal workers, this is going to be things like tunnels, right? You mentioned maybe tunnels, maybe like Prohibition-style tunnels or something like that under the city that were there that have fallen into disrepair.
Could be old subway tunnels, depending on where your game is set.
Yep. Subway tunnel. Or just good old-fashioned storm sewer decay and runoff and washout and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's stay on this side of it for right now, right? Because I feel like the prompted to investigate is going to kind of loop back into that because it's all going to be part of the larger investigation. It just might start you in a different way at the beginning, right? If there's, let's follow, and these can be decisions that the game master can make, right? So let's say it's tunnels, right? Prohibition style tunnels is what I'm right next to here. So this might lead to like mob stuff, organized crime, right? Mm-hmm. So there's some serious trouble you might have there with gangsters and stuff because if you're academics, you're completely ill-equipped to really deal with them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you're picturing this being set in an era where the mob is still relevant.
Right. Still super strong organized crime. You know, the code of silence still exists, all that kind of stuff, right? Pre-John Gotti dying and all that stuff.
Premier bootleg era.
Right.
Or later. Well, they're old Prohibition tunnels, or no?
What's that?
Are they current? Like, is it the 20s or is it the 40s?
Usually it's a little bit, I think it's, Trail will usually do our games like in the, like sort of like in the period between the First World War and the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So that kind of like 30s, you know, era.
So it'd be post-Prohibition.
So it's post-Prohibition, but
not by a lot.
Not, right. And they're still, you know, using tunnels for organized crime for all kinds of stuff, right?
Right.
So.
And there's still significant mob influence and all that.
Right. And then even if you wanted to go further back, you could still have them actually actively being used right now, right? So then our Prohibition tunnels, and I think we should just follow these down until we start to get into the supernatural part of this, if that makes sense. So on our mob stuff here, so each of these kind of breaks up into a scene, right? It's kind of the way I see it. And what we're not doing, in my vision of this, is spelling out the scenes. We're sort of like broad ideas of how, and then how they're going to interact with them, right? So they investigate these things. They find out, in this case, that there are tunnels that were used during the Prohibition, which leads them into some contact with the mob, right? Now, when I have mob here, I'm going to break this down into two different things, and one is a positive, and the other one is a negative. So do you have positive contacts with the mob, or do you have negative contacts with the mob, and what does that mean, right? And then I suppose we need to make a decision whether or not the mob is involved with the cultists and the summoning.
I feel like no.
Okay. So they're kind of like not a red herring, but they could also be somebody that you could leverage against the cultists if they were a positive thing. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even if they were negative if you push things the right way.
Yeah.
So
what I like about having them not be involved is that the positive and negative can be the same thing. It just has to do with the consequences for the player. So the mob is very good at, well, now you owe me something. Mm-hmm. So you've caused me an inconvenience, and for your troubles, you're going to figure out why my men keep going missing in the tunnels. And in exchange, I don't kill you. Mm-hmm. And then that can become a constant harassment as the game progresses, as the mob checks in on the players. Right. Whereas on the positive aspect, you're still solving the same mystery, but now the mob is looking at it as you're doing them a favor, and is more likely to lend you resources or whatever along the way.
Right. So on the negative side then, so you're talking about how like you would owe the mob, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got to fix it or you're going to, you know, be in debt to them, right?
Right. No, you're in debt to them now.
Well,
you're going to fix it or things are going to get worse progressively.
And then on the positive side of things, if you have positive interactions with the mob, it's what now?
It's the same thing, like, because they're still trying to they're having issues with the same mystery. Like, people are going missing in the tunnels, or we've seen weird things.
Right.
You know,
it's more of a thing of how hostile they are and how much they lean on you.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So
on one end of the spectrum, you have them being somewhat helpful, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have them providing constant hindrance along your way.
Well, and if they're on the negative side too, they can apply pressure and sort of amp up the tension, right? So if there's a moment where the game stalls later on, then Joey the Fist shows up and he's like, hey, why ain't you got my solution yet, you know?
Right.
And he's going to bust some heads of the professor of mathematics or whatever, which is the saddest fight in the entire world. So, very good.
It's also a cool thing. So in Trail of Cthulhu, you have touchstones. And it's a common mob stereotype for them to go after your family, your loved ones. So that provides a good way to bring those into play in a very relevant and scary way.
Right on. Okay, so let's keep following this mob thing. So you've mentioned how before maybe there's also some information to be gleaned from them, right? And you mentioned that there may have been some goons or whatever that have gone missing in the tunnels, right? So we're just going to make a note of that out here. And then, so missing goons, right? And then that's a whole investigation thing that they can run down as well. And I also feel like if there's goons missing, there's probably going to be municipal workers missing as well that have to work in those kind of areas. And we'll just make a note to that out to the side.
And maybe, there's some news articles or something about mysterious tunnel collapses. I mean, so it's not exactly like underground construction.
Let's not do that for the for the tunnels. Let's save that for either the subway or the washout.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because then it's like the tunnels prohibition tunnels lead to the mob, right? And then these other ones can lead to other sources of information and clues and whatnot, right? Do we want to chase this mob one down anymore there? Or is it just basically an external force and it's always going to put pressure on things?
I'm just seeing it as an external force.
Okay, very good. Under your missing goons, I think I make a list of 2 or 3 goons that had gone missing. Nobody terribly important, but people...
One of them, whose name is Frank the Tank.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, Frank the Tank. And I like Fat Tony. I always like mob names always have some kind of adjectives that go with them. Do you know what I mean? Like Big Jimmy, Skinny Willie, whatever.
Tall. He's just tall.
Tall Larry. Because we're in Indiana. Larry Bird. Hooray. All right.
Mo. That's the other guy.
Mo.
Just Mo. He didn't have any adjectives. His name's Mo.
All right. So the mob I've got now. So they're a potential ally-ish. I'm going to put ish out here. And then so they're there to push on touchstones and add tension and drive players to action. Right? Mm-hmm. Do we have an area where we know these people went missing? Like a section of the tunnels, maybe? Do you know what I'm saying?
Like that's information they have to find out, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to make a location down here.
You could also do like multiple locations centering around a specific area.
Makes sense too. Yeah. Okay, so let's take this subway one. I feel like the subway and the washout one kind of fit together. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So
they could. They don't have to.
No, but I feel like in order to keep this sort of time-wise and keep us a little more concise, because one of the problems I can see with this method is that if you follow this out, you can end up with something that's really, really big. And part of my problem is that when you do this, you sort of end up using half of it, but not the other half, which is why I like to paint these as broad ideas as opposed to full-on scenes and detailing every aspect of it, which kind of connects back to my style of improvised gaming anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to, for simplistic sake, for simplicity, we're going to kind of combine this abandoned subway and washout thing. So maybe it's just a good old-fashioned washout. Maybe there was old subway tunnels that weren't being used that have been washed out. But either way.
If it's a washout, it doesn't have to be an old subway. Like, depending on how much havoc you want to cause. Like, you could shut down an entire section of New York subway because water burst through the subway wall at some location.
Right on. All right, so this one, how are we getting... So they're going to go down, they're going to find out that there's this washout and broken down subway section, right? So where does that lead them once they discover that?
Back to the central location of badness.
Which is?
To be determined.
Oh, okay, so our location of... Right, well, what I'm talking about is maybe where do they go to get more information on the subway or on the washout? Because you mentioned before something about...
This feels like it falls back in the geology category as well.
It's a geologist, right?
Is there a riverologist?
A riverologist. I'm sure there is. I don't think they're probably called riverologists, but... All right, so I feel like this subway and washout thing is going to lead us back to missing municipal workers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you think that's a logical connection to make there? I also feel like, kind of tying back to the first part of this, if you're prompted or if they just go on their own, if they have some conversation with the municipal workers, I think maybe they're going to be hush-hush about the fact that there are missing ones. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, and you could also make it they're hush-hush for a reason. So maybe the reason this subway washout occurred in the first place is because they were short on guys. They rushed through the job to get it done so as not to drag on time.
Right.
Pressures from the city, all of those types of things, and perhaps someone responsible for codes and inspections maybe was slipped some money under the table.
So I've got hush hush OSHA regulations, basically, right? Mm-hmm. OSHA I don't think is a thing back then, but you get the point, right? And that actually could also...
fits in the mob era too.
Yes, that's where I was going.
And that's that whole deal.
That's exactly where I was going. So then it kind of it links these two things together side by side, so that if you don't go to one or don't have a connection there, it still could lead you, back and forth, right? Because inevitably some foreman that works for the city probably has connections to the mob or whatever, and you're going to get sent to speak with, this city foreman, right? The city laborer foreman or whatever. Okay, so we have several locations now where we have some missing goons and some missing workers, right? But I feel like the workers maybe we need not just missing, because that would be a little far-fetched if they were just gone and I think more like industrial accidents
accidents,
style.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's also the opportunity to end up, maybe at the library going through archived newspapers or talking with media and press journalists.
All right, so I just have industrial accidents written down, right? And then so this is going to break up into a couple different things. So I think police are going to be brought in, right, for an actual investigation, right? Mm-hmm. And then we've got media that you mentioned. And then what was the third one?
Just library, archive. I mean, that's still media, but it's how you go about.
It's just a different way of going about, right? So we'll in this case we'll phrase the media part as actually talking to the actual reporters that wrote the stories and interviewing them, and then under this other one we'll write library.
Yeah, research,
and that's just an actual research library use one version of the skill for Trail of Cthulhu in that case, right? Again, mob. Very clear connection to the police, right? So that could, bring them in there. And then also, anytime they go do these things that have a connection back to the mob, that word is going to make it back to whoever the mob boss is, right? And it's just another moment for them to say, if they don't tick off the boxes for talking to people that is going to get back to the mob, then that's more times they're going to put pressure on them because they don't feel like they're actually doing their job, right?
There should be some opportunity to speak with a coroner in here as well. Maybe one body does get found, and
we sadly enough, we neglected a big piece of this is the medical people, which is a big part of Trail of Cthulhu as well, with physicians and stuff like that. And coroners and all that stuff. So they could go talk to the coroner.
You might as well throw the asylum on there too.
Actual doctors.
If somebody sees a shogoth, they're going to go crazy, and if they talk about it...
Okay, so here we go. I think that is the first place where we bring in some otherworldly aspects, right? So far what we have structured here is pretty mundane, right? But I like the idea of your industrial accident having one survivor that sort of saw things at a distance maybe and was their mind was broken because they saw this shogoth, right? So we're going to box here for asylum.
I think when you're talking to the medical personnel, you could also end up at the asylum.
Yeah,
so that's not the only...
Right, connected there. Mm-hmm. And then, the police could send you any of these people really could send you to the asylum because the police are going to be like, well, there was so-and-so and he saw something and he was just never right and he was broken after that. Same thing with the media. They may not I don't think it would come up in the research because I don't think that they would necessarily mention it in the paper. It would just be something they don't talk about,
I don't know, or sensationalized newspaper ads of, 5 municipal workers go missing.
I'm more thinking
6 is sent to Arkham Asylum.
One survivor, or something like that, but not a lot of information. There may be just enough to point you in the direction we need to go do some research somewhere else, but not necessarily who the name is to glean from that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sole survivor remains in catatonic state.
Exactly, that kind of stuff. So, but our media would have gone and interviewed them and talked to them, or at least found out where they were. And then while our library, it will point to it, but it won't actually get you there. It will point you to other people to go talk to, basically, right? So who wrote the article or whatever, or who is the lead detective on the case or whatever it is. All right, so let's stop here with this asylum because that's when we sort of start to shift gears and go into our full-on cult and supernatural part of this, right? So up until this point, we're pretty mundane, right? Mm-hmm. So we chase this down from the they go on their own side, right? So if they're prompted to investigate, How does that change things, or does it change things at all?
I think it could, but I think it really depends on who is prompting the investigation.
Okay.
So now that we've found this all the way through, is this an investigation maybe the mob is investigating to begin with? They're calling in a favor you owe them from your time on the force, and they did that thing for you.
Right. Same thing with the police. Maybe they're asking for private investigators to go and look into something that they can't do things through the conventional legal methods of investigation.
Or perhaps the widows of the union workers there's some kind of fund that's been put together to hire their own investigator.
I like that too. All right, so broadly speaking,
it could also be a thing from the city. I mean, if you wanted to go that route as well, politics being what it is, I need you to investigate this discreetly. It's an election year coming up.
Oh yeah. And that could be even another interesting way. And a couple of these ones could go that way, where it's like you're sent to investigate something. I think there's foul play and they're trying to cover something up, and sort of like setting the players on the path that while something nefarious is happening, but it's totally mundane, they're doing this to try and discredit somebody, or they're doing this to try and slow things down so they can hire more workers.
It changes the amount of pressure, too, if someone says, I need you to investigate this, but don't go making a big fuss.
Right.
Versus, make as much waves as you need to. I need an answer, depending on who the assignment is coming from, will change the approach pretty significantly.
So each of these four things we have now, we have politics, mob, police, and widow. Each of them would basically flavor things in their own kind of way, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not going to change the game.
You should put media on there too. There's always a chance that someone could be playing a journalist.
Oh, true. True.
And then they just get sent there like, my intuition tells me there's more to this sinkhole.
Very good. And then these 5 things now would just sort of flavor things and how you're going about your investigation, whether it's open or sort of like try to keep on the down low, or how much leverage you have to apply to things, and that kind of stuff. But I think functionally it doesn't change things. It's just more of a flavor and genre decisions that you're going to make, right? Mm-hmm. We have 2 things that lead us into our occultness now. We have locations and asylum. So locations are some kind of pattern of places where these disappearances are happening, right?
Right.
So I think one fun thing to do, and we'll just mark this coming out here off of locations, is there's some kind of pattern that can be found in where the disappearances happen, right? Mm-hmm. So while it's not critical to find the pattern, if they do, then that will give them more information about whatever it is, right? So what other things are there to glean from the location side, these locations?
When you say pattern, you mean like the locations form an actual...
some kind of a pattern.
Physical pattern, like a grid? Mm-hmm. Okay. There's also things that the locations have in common. So this is a cool way to pull in like art history or some of your other soft science type stuff.
Well, actual history. Maybe they're happening in areas where there's bad energy from, I don't know, muggings or homicides that had happened because it's below those areas, right? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like this shogoth might be drawn to that negative energy, and that's where it's doing these things or whatever, right?
I was thinking more like the hidden Illuminati sort of symbols, or like think like your Indiana Jones, like finding the markers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the library. Well,
that kind of brings a connection between the pattern and the commonality, right? So maybe the pattern might be where they're physically happening. So there's some kind of, like you said, sigil or whatever, right? And that's where they're happening. And in those kind of ways that towns have in those downtown areas, they have like those monuments that are just there because it's always been there, right? So there's the statue of the guy on the horse.
A random plaque no one ever reads.
Right. And it's got whatever it is on there, right? So it kind of can bring those two together. So what else do we have for locations then? I think we have, like you mentioned, the soft sciences. So what about the actual hard physical sciences? So maybe some forensic collection that they can do. Maybe they find some weird goo or something that was part of the shogoth, or maybe a weird piece of meat that if they do some kind of testing on doesn't show up as like beef or pork or whatever the heck, right? So I'm just going to put forensics. And that includes all of that kind of stuff, right?
Eyewitness statements.
And that goes back to our asylum, though. Mm-hmm.
but maybe other things that they have in common. So maybe nobody else saw anything, but maybe everybody was like, well, I felt a rumbling. Well, I heard this specific noise beforehand. Oh, there was this really weird smell in the air that I don't remember.
So I think that's like service people then, right? Maybe the smell came up through the sewers or something?
It could be also people that live in the area, people who work in the area, hot dog stand guy.
Right on.
So newspaper stand dude.
Surface interview, right?
Yes.
And that all of those could tie back to, like, well, you mentioned the media, right? So the newspaper stand guy, the beat cop, it could tie back to him.
I think it also gives a good pull for characters who have traits in social, have put their points in social things as opposed to
just go interview all kinds of people that are just in the area, right? So from the homeless guy that just sort of lives in the alley to the shopkeepers that work the area and that kind of stuff. Perfect.
Like, I remember, the sound of all kinds of dogs barking all of a sudden, and so then the surrounding story will sound very much similar everywhere that they go.
At this point, I feel like we need to kind of detail our cult a little bit that's trying to summon Shub-Niggurath, right? Or at least has successfully summoned a shogoth. And I like the idea of summoning shogoths, and you can, if you don't like this, let me know. Summoning shogoths, but having to sacrifice the shogoths to complete the summoning of Shub-Niggurath. Does that make sense?
Seems appropriately difficult and complicated.
Right. So maybe if these disappearances are happening over a little bit of a prolonged time, right? Maybe these missing workers or the goons initially were sacrificed to summon the Shub-Niggurath, right? I mean, to summon the Shogoth. And then once we have enough Shogoth here, we have we have an actual Shogoth. Now the job is to sacrifice the Shogoth to summon actual Shub-Niggurath. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you like that?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so I think maybe our goons went missing first, right? And then the city workers are second because they're killed by the Shogoth. Okay, so I'm just going to make note of our cultist goals here, which is find human sacrifice, summon Shogoth, sacrifice Shogoth, and summon Shub-Niggurath. So, like, I have this vision of if things go wrong, and our climax is that our Shogoth is, like, sort of sacrificed and killed, like, as maybe it bursts open, and then, like, all this life comes, like, mutated, terrible, cancerous life comes bursting out of it as Shub-Niggurath is born from the flesh of the Shogoth, if that makes sense.
Sounds magical.
Hooray! Sounds like a magically great time. They really need like a Disney World version of like H.P. Lovecraft. It would be terrible. Alrighty. So, cultists. Do we want to make any influential cultists real quick?
I think there's probably somebody in the mob who is a cultist.
Okay. So like an important person or...
Could be. Yeah. And maybe there's even some misdirection. Maybe like this person is one of the people that went missing. Mm-hmm. And it's really like, oh, but actually he's not missing.
Oh, right.
He's the bad guy.
Okay. Fair enough. I also have like, I made a note of like some, like as a way, if you have spent all of your points or like on occult knowledge, is that like there can be some kind of like creepy old country grandma kind of character that's connected to one of the mob people, right? Mm-hmm. That has this sort of old country knowledge and that kind of stuff, you know, that you could draw on if you needed to. But ideally, her and our person from the asylum would kind of have the same information to give to the players as in terms of clues, right? So just two ways to get them that information, right? Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a mob captain who is, I'll put missing in quotation. And then I think it's always fun to do some kind of city politician or whatever, maybe like a low-level person, right? That just has enough influence to be in the know, but not really enough to like swing things in a huge way.
Maybe your missing union workers, the widows, are actually the cult.
Ah, that's awesome.
5 or 6 widows that are the entire cult.
The cult of the widows. That's an awesome idea. Like
they're called the Widowmakers.
Right. Okay. For the summoning of our actual elder god, right? does that have to happen at a specific time like they always do? Like, under the third new moon of the fourth trimester, whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? To where there's a timeline on the cultists where they have to make things happen at this time?
I mean... Because I could go either way. I don't have to be married to the idea.
I feel like you can sort of ratchet up the tension, or we're compressing time down to where there's not a ton of time for our players to get fully prepared to deal with whatever it is. They have to go in sort of like with 3/4 of the preparations of what they want, as opposed to, and that information can come from either the old country grandmother or our asylum person, right? So they know date and time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Which is really the most important thing to get from here. What other kinds of important information do we want to be able to divulge from our asylum person or our old country grandmother?
I think at that point, it's still unknown whether it's supernatural or not. Right. So just the startling revelation that there may be something going on that's more than just missing people and collapsing bits of tunnel.
So I'm going to put supernatural confirmed. Mm-hmm. Okay. I feel like maybe our old country grandmother may not have all of the pieces, so she's going to be in a position to give you some information to go on and send you maybe back to a library somewhere, right? Where you have to do some more research, which could draw in our more academic and research-based characters, right? To get things like date and time, what it's going to be summoning, what they have to do to make it work, and that kind of stuff, right? To where once they've realized it's a full-on supernatural thing, now they've got to do like the occult investigation part of it in the library, in the forbidden stacks or whatever. Does that make sense? So I'm going to do a library back here. And this is going to be for occult info. Confirmed. So I think maybe she's sort of like the unreliable person. She knows a little bit, but not enough, and she might be a little bit confused or whatever. And
so why is she going to talk to you in the first place? How do you even gain access to this person?
Well, she's connected to the mob, right?
Right, so, but Mob Tony isn't going to send you to talk to his grandmother. He doesn't want your filthy hands anywhere near his.
Hang on. Hear me out. I have this vision of you go, like it happens in lots of mob movies, right? Where you go over to the mobster's house and he's there in the kitchen at the table, and then the grandma is making the sauce, right? And, baking the thing, and she's weird and kind of kooky anyway, right? In that old kind of way. And the wife is, the mobster's wife is there sort of helping in that kind of, and you have, I think there's just this sort of strange, bizarre meld of this old-timey Italian mob family with this investigation going on, you know what I mean? And I think there could be some cool role-playing moments there, maybe. And then if they wanted to pursue the grandmother, maybe they do, or maybe they don't. So if they open up about the investigation to our mobster Tony, the grandma can hear about it and be like, I told you, whatever it is, and then it's like, well, what? And then it might lead to something, and it may not. They don't have to pursue it, but they could, right? Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
I just trying to, like any sort of horror suspense game, I think you need those moments like that to kind of like break it up and lighten it up a little bit, so that as you ramp things up, you can bring it down and then ramp it back up again, right? Towards our climax. She's going to be this kooky grandma that has some information that's going to send you maybe back towards the library and that kind of stuff, right? Our asylum person, though, what do they have? They're sort of like an unreliable narrator as well because, well, they're broken and crazy. So how much can you really take for sure that they're going to tell you? Right? So what information are they going to give that the grandma is not necessarily? Well, they're eyewitness, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going to have some kind of like crazy account of what happened.
I don't think it's even going to be that specific. Like they're completely broken is the idea. Like their sanity is fractured. Mm-hmm. I think you can get some physical descriptors of a creature. Mm-hmm.
So like, big amorphous appendagey blob shogoth thing, which shouldn't compute to those characters more than likely anyway, unless they've got a lot of experience with mythos stuff as it is, right? I'm going to put eyewitness ? How's that? Okay, so at this point, we have our characters. They've interviewed loads of people. They've gathered lots of clues. Doctors, police, mob, media, library, forensics, patterns, all this kind of stuff, right? So they have the date and time, and they're going to come try and actually stop our ritual now. That's the next step, right? Is that where we kind of start to bring this thing down?
Seems to make the most sense.
Okay. So my only suggestion would be is that when this starts to come down and get honed down, is that whatever date and time you pick, you make it so there's some kind of a time crunch so that it puts the pressure on them to not just, nuke a city block or whatever, or wherever the shogoth is so they have to physically go in and figure something out a little bit underprepared, but not completely, right? Mm-hmm. Right on. I realize this is a lot of all over the place and chicken scratch and whatever, but does if it was laid out, maybe, once you have this initial part, which is kind of a mess.
A tree, it's a boat.
Right. Do you feel like you could sort of reassemble this back together in a way to make it, to where you could sort of take game notes on it, and jot down names and more arrows and whatever?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think that, because I agree, I think that in this current form, I don't think it would be the most useful thing to run the actual game because it's kind of scattered as we brainstorm this.
If you laid it out,
right?
Made it a little more.
I definitely think it is
linear,
right? So actually like a trouble tree, like top down, and then sort of like your box on the side with names and whatever. Do you feel like this wasn't a whole lot to do, right? So we're at unedited. We're at about 50 minutes right now.
I feel like I could run this game right now.
So
let's do it. See y'all later.
But do you think that this is something that you would actually use, though?
For this type of game? For sure. Yeah. For
like a mystery style game?
Yeah.
Okay, so what about taking it out of... Clearly this works for mystery style stuff, right? And this really is, if I put together a Trail of Cthulhu thing or any kind of mystery stuff, this is how I do it, regardless of whether it's Trail or a murder mystery for vampire or whatever that part of it is, right? If it's a mystery investigation kind of thing, this is how I put it together. Now, do you feel like you would use this for D&D?
If I was doing a D&D mystery session, yes.
So I would say that I wouldn't use it for a game session. I wouldn't plan like a game session or a couple sessions with this, but I think I might use it to plan a larger campaign.
I mean, I try to incorporate a little bit of mystery in the fantasy games that I run too, so...
Very true.
I think it could easily be used for that.
Okay. I can see it. It's just, I feel like when my approach to fantasy gaming is significantly different than my approach to the way I run, I guess, non-fantasy games. I don't know if that's a good way to say it or not, but like
you could change how you do, like Worms. You could easily have done one of these for Worms.
True. Very true. Yeah.
And it would work just fine as to where you have the clues placed. And we kind of did something a little bit similar, not, as straightforward for sure, but...
Right. So what about political intrigue stuff like Vampire?
I don't know. I don't think it's true. You need a web for that.
It's very true.
It's
and
more
some
like
of this is
designing,
kind of web-like.
Yeah, but this is more like decisions and, what happens when your player goes to this location. Whereas with that, it's more like a web of how people interact and like a list of goals. I guess you probably could, but it doesn't seem to me like this is complicated enough.
Right.
For that. There's not enough... Yeah. Politics.
I can kind
There's
of
not
see
enough politics on it.
True. But I can kind of see how the relationship map that you use in V5 could kind of map onto this with some modifications, right? And I almost feel like this could be a good way as a player to sort of like map your way to success. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if you were... Well, like
it sounds like the world's lamest motivational seminar title. Map your way to success.
That's the Ventru method, right?
That's all I heard.
Ventru map to success, right? But like if you think about it, as a way to sort of like do your own in-game notes and that kind of stuff, right? And so you have your ultimate thing for what you're striving for at the bottom, and maybe some steps you think that might get you there. And then as you try and tick them off and do them, then you can sort of map onto it how you did it and the people that helped you or hindered you.
That's not like a decision tree, though.
No, but I'm thinking from the player's perspective. If a player wanted to try and make use of some of these ideas, and that they would try and build out a tree of decisions for them to get them there, and then modify it as they went.
I feel like that's reaching. I don't think I would ever use that as a player.
I've done something similar, not necessarily with the goal part of it, but with like a relationship map to track things and sort of like tally up things that I had done for people.
That's not a decision-making tree.
I agree.
That's a completely different thing.
It's a favorite tree.
No. It's a giving tree. Also, no.
Right on. Well, should we wrap this one up here, or...
Yeah, I think so.
I feel like we got a pretty good thing here. I think we made a little...
It does look like a pirate ship, though.
Okay.
Just saying.
Oh, I see with the thing here.
Yeah, there's like a flag, and this is like the like the bow deck thing, and yeah. It's got an oar.
That would be the rudder.
Shh, it's an oar. It's a one-oar ship.
Not going very far.
This is my pirate ship, okay?
Okay.
The decision tree says we're going far.
Aye, me. All right, well, I think that'll do it for us this week. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. Kind of an interesting way to sort of put your games together, especially if they involve any kind of mystery elements to them. And more or less the way about how I kind of put mine together in a very similar way, and I think I'll probably adopt, not even probably, I will be adopting some of the things that I've done here, sort of like me and Lacey brainstorming this thing out together. And who knows, this may turn into an indie RPG day thing or something. We may bring some Trail of Cthulhu there. Lacey said she's ready to run this game as it is already, so
I lied.
I think that's what's going to happen next, right? Right on. Well, as you guys know, we are a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so quick promo for all things good and nerdy, better podcasting, Dad.io. There's loads and loads of great podcasts there. I don't have my phone up here with me to do an actual episode promo for them, but there are loads of great shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com, and you should go over there and check them out because they have loads of different podcasts about all kinds of awesome nerdy shows and different nerdy topics. So head over there and give one of those podcasts a shot and let us know what you think. If you like what we do here at Just One More Fix, you can head over to patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and support us there and get access to all of our raw audio and pre-shows and all the awesomeness that exists with the unedited stuff that we put out there, as well as early access to our actual plays and all that kind of stuff. You can also get a hold of our quarterly zine in PDF or print form, depending on what level you fund at. You should join the awesome ranks of our Patreon supporters like Treza, Tiziano Furlano, Alistair H., Simon McNair, Alan White, and the OG Todd Olson. I think that'll do it for us, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.